What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. Today we're going to be continuing our series covering which stats matter for a specific position in Madden, and today we're going to be covering tight ends, and we're going to be covering essentially which stats are most important for the tight end position depending on what you're trying to do, and which stats to kind of shy away from and not really focus on, or which stats might be a little bit deceiving on whether they actually matter for you or not. And the tight end position is actually a pretty good one as an example for this, because there are quite a few stats, in my opinion, that show up on the player card here for a tight end that don't really matter much for you. First things first, I'm going to obviously preface this by saying that it depends on what you're trying to do with your tight end on which stats matter for you. So if you want a pure receiving tight end, obviously you're going to be going for the receiving stats. If you want a blocking tight end, you're going to be going for those stats. But there is a distinction between a vertical threat tight end and a possession type of tight end and a blocking tight end as well. So I think very, very important for you guys to kind of understand what's going on with the stats per position here. Let me go ahead and bring up my stream on my phone just so I can make sure that the volume is actually on, because it looks like there's quite a few comments here early on this video. If I can actually get to my channel, because I might be having an issue with my audio right now. All right, perfect. All right, so audio's working. Let's go ahead and jump into it. So first things first, let's talk about the receiving stats for the tight end and essentially what you're trying to do. So as a vertical threat type of receiver, and a lot of these receiving stats are going to kind of play into the receivers as well whenever we do that video, but as a receiver, what are you trying to do as a tight end? As a tight end, generally speaking, you're going to be in over the middle type of spots. You know, occasionally you're going to be going outside, but a lot of times the difference between a tight end and a receiver is that you're not going to have the same type of space that a receiver will have to catch the ball. And so immediately for a tight end, if you're trying to pass them the ball, catch in traffic is going to be one of the most important stats for a tight end if you're trying to pass them the football. And why is that? Well, catch in traffic affects whether a player can catch the ball with other players around them. When other players are trying to hit them, trying to knock the ball out, trying to make a play on the ball, catch in traffic is the stat that is going to determine whether the player hangs on to it or not. And as you guys will know, as you've played Madden over the years, a tight end is really reliable in the red zone, in short yardage situations. Yes, you will use them in other ways, but that is where you rely on them the most. And in situations like that where you just need a short catch or you need a touchdown catch because he's a big-bodied player, you expect him to get the catch over somebody else, catch in traffic is the stat that you're going to be relying upon. So make sure that you guys are paying attention to a player's catch in traffic rating as a tight end, because you might be wondering why your tight end is dropping the ball. He might have good catching stats, but his catch in traffic rating specifically might be lacking. And that could be a part of the issue that's going on there with your tight end. Likewise, the catching stat, the spec catch stat, those are going to matter if you're trying to lob the ball up to your player, if you're trying to get your tight end involved in the receiving game. But more importantly than anything, the stats that are going to matter most in your receiving game are going to be your athletic stats. So if we look at Baylor Cupp here, for example, he's a pretty athletic tight end. He's not the most athletic tight end in the world. I know nowadays everybody wants an 88 or better speed tight end, somebody like an Evan Ingram who has like 90 speed. But realistically speaking, you're not going to be able to achieve that. And so what you're looking to do with a tight end and their, specifically their athletic stats, is you're looking for, if you want them to be a receiving threat, you want them to be able to match up well against linebackers and probably some of the slower safeties in the league. You know, generally speaking, linebackers are going to have in that mid-80s speed range, so you can get away with a tight end that has speed in the low 80s, you know, 83, maybe 84. You can get away with even lower, but the slower that these players are, the less they're going to be able to create separation, and the more important it's going to be for that catch and traffic rate rating to be high for them. That one is absolutely crucial. The slower that a tight end gets, because that means they're going to be able to get less separation. Now, this is another position where your change of direction and your agility don't necessarily matter as much. I didn't really specifically say it with the offensive line video, but in this video I'm going to actually specifically say it. The agility and the change of direction don't matter that much for your tight end, because generally speaking, they're never going to have an agility or a change of direction rating that is good enough for them to be able to make significant moves, cuts, spins, whatever it might be. Your tight end's not really going to be making those moves. Generally speaking, you're going to want your tight end to be able to catch the ball, maybe stiff arm a player, maybe truck a player or something like that. But unless you have a super athletic player, maybe like a wide receiver shifted to tight end, you're not looking for agility, you're not looking for change of direction. Though these ratings do help, they help the player be able to change directions, they help the player be able to run their routes and things like that. That's not specifically what you're looking for. You're going to be looking for a speed stat, an acceleration stat to boot, and then you're primarily looking for the catch and traffic rating. Now, a couple of other ratings that get a little bit overlooked with tight ends is their route running ratings and their release. These ratings do help quite a bit as a tight end. Now, what I will say is that the short route running, the medium route running are obviously the most important. Very rarely are you going to have a tight end running any type of deep route. And if they are running a deep route, it's probably just a streak, and it's really hard to mess up a streak, so you really don't need deep route running from a tight end. So generally, you're going to be looking for a decent short route running and medium route running stat. It doesn't have to be crazy good or anything like that. 70 honestly is good enough, and anything above that just helps out more. It helps them create space as a tight end, but like I said, I'm going to go back to the fact that their catch and traffic rating is going to be the most important stat, and their speed is probably not going to be that great, and therefore the route running doesn't matter as much, because no matter how you slice it, these tight ends that you're running with are probably going to be catching in traffic. They're probably going to be catching in hard spots. They're going to do jump balls and things like that with players around them all the time. And so very rarely are they going to be quick, agile, athletic enough to create space anyway. And so again, I go back to catch and traffic and I say, no matter what your other stats are, catch and traffic is like number one. That is really important for a tight end, because those are the situations that those players are going to be into. That's what they're going to be involved on. Jumping likewise goes into that. A player with better jumping is going to be able to go up and get the ball. I've noticed that with tight ends, a lot of the big body players, guys like Baylor Cupp here, are simply able to go up and get the ball even if they don't have a fantastic jumping stat or a fantastic spec catch stat, just because they're a bigger body than a lot of the players that they might match up against. And so that is kind of one of the advantages of tight ends, is if you can get a guy that just simply has a bigger body, it seems like they catch the ball more. Now, I don't have any statistics or any actual viable information to back that up for you guys, but one thing that I've noticed is that, Zach Gentry on my team, he catches the ball like crazy over people, and his catching stats just simply aren't good. He's got 80 catching, 78 catch in traffic, 77 spec catch, and he just goes up and gets the ball over top of players all the time. And I'm pretty sure that it's just because he's 6'8", 265, and he's just unable to get the ball knocked out in the same way that a shorter player would. Now, like I said, that is just my personal experience, and there's nothing factual to back that up. You have probably seen it in some of my gameplay where he will go up and get a crazy catch or something like that, but Zach Gentry, just because he's tall, seems like he gets the ball more, so that is something that matters for a player like this. But one of the things that I want to talk about heavily in this video is the fact that I said that some of the ratings that are on this player card are misleading as being important to a specific player. So, there are the obvious ratings like awareness that we know is going to determine how well this player pays attention and is looking back for the ball and is able to actually do their job. Obviously, that's going to matter for a tight end. And the run blocking stats are going to matter for a tight end. You want them to have good run blocking if you want them in on those types of plays. So decent run blocking stats in Madden 21 tend to be like 65 and better for a tight end, to be quite honest with you. Anything above that is pretty good. So Baylor Cupp here is starting off with a good run blocking stat. But the impact blocking stat, the lead blocking stat, the run block finesse, the run block power, those are all pretty important for you as a tight end. But one of the things that I want to say that shows up here on the primary core attributes for a tight end is the pass blocking. pass blocking generally isn't going to matter for your tight end. And what I want to say is that pass blocking is going to affect their overall rating, their archetype, their blocking stat. If they get a ton of pass blocking upgrades, that's going to help their blocking overall increase, but that's like a fake increase to me. Now, some of you probably will use your tight ends in pass blocking situations. I don't generally do that. If I have a tight end on the field, I pretty much want them to be going out for a pass. Or I want them to be run blocking for me. And so pass blocking for me is like fool's gold. I've mentioned this before on the channel, fool's gold. It's a stat that will just kind of fake upgrade your player. You know, you could get a bunch of pass blocking points, pass blocking power, pass block finesse, and that could increase their overall because it does factor into their blocking rating or into their blocking archetype. And if that's not something that you're using for your tight end, then those are useless upgrades for you. And so that's why sometimes I tend to shy away from upgrading my player as a blocker, as a tight end, because you will get those pass blocking upgrades and they don't matter for me, because that's not how I use my tight ends. I don't use my tight ends as pass blockers. And so, you know, if that's something that you guys are similar on, that you're not using your tight ends as pass blockers, then you're going to want to be aware of what's going on with those pass blocking ratings, because there are a lot of tight ends in the game that, you know, they might show up as like a 70 plus overall as a blocking tight end, and that might fool you into signing them. You might look at them and say, oh, they're a good blocker, let me sign them, and then they can't actually run block for you, because where a lot of that attribute is coming from is their pass blocking rating. So keep that in mind whenever you guys are actually searching for tight ends or figuring out how to upgrade your players or who you want to keep on your team, because those pass blocking stats are like I said, fool's gold. That's the best way to put it. In my opinion, it's not something that you're going to use on your tight end, but it will affect their overall rating and therefore cause some issues there with what's going on. Now, we can look at some of these other stats here, but a lot of these other stats are going to be, once the tight end has the ball in their hands, are these stats actually going to affect what they do? Their trucking, their stiff arm, their carrying, change of direction, we talked about that, spin move, juke move, ball carrier vision. A lot of these stats aren't going to matter a whole lot for you. And one of the things that I want to cite, and again, I don't have any pure evidence to support this other than my gameplay itself. Baylor Cupp, for example, being a big-bodied player, and Zach Gentry being a big-bodied player, they tend to be able to truck defensive backs. They tend to be able to push people over. There's been various times, even in user games, where I've gone up against defensive backs with Baylor Cupp, and he just simply breaks the tackle. He simply trucks them or stiff arms them, and he's really good at it. But what I want to show you guys is that in his secondary attributes here, he only has 65 trucking. He only has 66 stiff arm. Now you compare that to a running back who very often they have in the 80s on those stats, and you can very rarely with some of those players actually get a good stiff arm off or a good truck off. I think that the real difference there that's going on is the size of their body or potentially their weight. Now we've talked many times on this channel, and there's been much research done on whether height, weight, and those types of things matter for a player, but I think that in Madden 21 it might actually matter a little bit more than we have suspected in the past. Like I said, I don't have any specific hard numbers to back that up or anything to specifically prove that, but I do want to point out to you guys that it might be a little bit less important to have the actual trucking stat and the stiff arm stat or whatever move you're trying to do there, and just have a big player, have a guy that's, you know, above 6'5" with decent weight, because that could help them out. I just want to draw your attention to that, get you guys thinking about it. Like I said, I don't have anything to back it up, and I want to make sure that that's clear. But if any of you guys want to do any testing on that, I might do some testing on it myself. I think that is something to pay attention to. The carrying stat is a stat that I think a lot of people neglect, but it is very important. If you guys have players fumble all the time, you want to pay attention to a player that has a good carrying rating. Very often with your receivers, your tight ends, you're going to find players that have really poor carrying ratings, and you might be wondering why your player is constantly fumbling the ball once he gets hit after he catches it. Well, a very easily described way to tell there is looking at their carrying rating. You know, 74 carrying is pretty bad, and as a receiver that might actually be decent, or as a tight end that might actually be decent, but you have to compare that against a running back. Generally speaking, a good running back is going to have like 90 carrying, and so that difference there is going to be why that player is fumbling the football. And so one of the things that you can do to get around that is a lot of these tight ends and receivers are not going to have good carrying stats. You have to play a little bit differently. Whereas as a running back, you're going to be initiating contact, you're going to be going after contact or things like that. With a tight end, even a lot of the tight ends in the game, you're going to want to just cover the ball and kind of go down. It's not a lot of times that you're going to want to go up against a linebacker and just openly try to make a move against them or try to truck them. If you're going up against a defensive back or something like that, sure. But against some of the harder hitters, you could really cause yourself some problems by fumbling the ball with a tight end, because a lot of them have poor carrying ratings like this at 74. Then there's the clear stats that are just physical related with injury and stamina and toughness. The one here that I do want to emphasize a little bit is stamina, because depending on how you actually utilize your tight ends, stamina is going to affect them pretty greatly. A lot of tight ends will have lower stamina like this, 85 stamina for Baylor Cup, for example. And if we look at Zach Gentry, we'll see what his is. He's got 88 stamina. So the thing is if you're using your tight end as more of a vertical threat, if you have fast tight ends like Alberto or Zach Gentry or whoever it might be on your team, they have low stamina in comparison to a receiver. So you might try to utilize them in the same way as you would utilize a receiver, but I want to caution you guys against that, because they very often have lower stamina than a receiver does. Most receivers will have 90 plus, which means that they're going to be pretty fresh anytime that they're on the field, whereas that's not necessarily the case with a tight end. And Alberto, for example, he's got 88 speed, and I could pass to him all day, but I might cause myself some issues with him starting to drop the ball because he's tired, or he starts to fumble because he's tired, or maybe he starts to make mistakes in the blocking game by getting holding penalties and things like that because he's tired. So you have to be more careful with how you actually utilize a tight end in comparison to some of those other positions, because there's more room for error. Or I guess I should say there's less room for error, I guess is the way to phrase it, with a tight end, because these players will also be in on the running game more often with crucial blocks, and they could get called for holding penalties if they're tired and things like that. And they could fumble more. If you're trying to get these guys catches in clutch situations, you want them to be fresh whenever you're trying to pass them the ball on that crucial third down or on that red zone attempt. You want those players to be fresh, and you have to utilize them a little bit differently to keep them fresh, because they have a lower stamina number. Now, that'll obviously depend on what type of league you're in with the stamina ratings, the fatigue ratings, and things like that. But something that I do want to caution you guys on, and I want you guys to be aware of. So hopefully this information helps you guys out in some way. Like I said, a lot of this is straightforward, and that's what this series is going to be, but it is something that I want to have on my channel as a good guide for anybody that might not be familiar with this information to utilize this information and take advantage of it. So if this does help you guys out in some way, make sure you guys leave a like on the video, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel if you're new. Make sure to look out for those pass block ratings, because like I said, they're fool's gold. That is one that will pop up on their core attributes, but it really doesn't help them out unless you're specifically using a tight end as a pass blocker. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Hope you guys have a good night.